This is the book Mein Kampf, written by Adolf Hitler while he was imprisoned in 1925. In it, Hitler outlines his views on Germany and the so-called Aryan race. Interestingly, a phrase often associated with this book is, "Hitler is your God and Nietzsche is his prophet." However, it's intriguing that, in none of its pages, is the name of Friedrich Nietzsche mentioned. How did Nietzsche become associated with Mein Kampf and Nazism if Hitler never cited him as an influence? There is no evidence that Hitler ever read Nietzsche, so how did Nietzsche, who never supported anti-Semitism, become linked to a regime that preached racial supremacy? And how were his ideas distorted and manipulated by one of the most dangerous governments in history? In this video, I want to explore the reasons behind this controversial association and provide a deep and enlightening analysis of how one of the most complex and influential philosophers in history was misunderstood, and delve into the hidden secrets of a connection that should never have existed. Mein Kampf, published by Adolf Hitler in 1925, is a manifesto detailing his political and ideological views, including the belief in the superiority of the Aryan race. Curiously, while this book became the Bible of Nazism, there is no direct mention of Friedrich Nietzsche, raising questions about how and why his ideas became associated with the Nazi movement. It is noteworthy that Hitler himself did not have Nietzsche's works in his personal library, which casts doubt on the philosopher's direct influence on him. When asked by a German filmmaker about his interest in Nietzsche, Hitler responded that the philosopher was not his guide. So, how can we explain the famous quote, "Hitler is your God and Nietzsche is his prophet"? The answer lies in how Nietzsche's ideas were interpreted and promoted by other figures within the Nazi movement. Nazi propaganda often sought to legitimize its racial and political beliefs by invoking the authority of respected intellectual figures. Nietzsche, with his criticisms of Christianity and his philosophy of the Übermensch, provided fertile ground for ideological distortions. For example, the concept of the Übermensch was twisted to justify the idea of a superior race, even though Nietzsche was speaking of personal transcendence, not racial superiority. The absence of a direct reading of Nietzsche by Hitler was compensated for by propagandists who reinterpreted his ideas to align with the Nazi agenda. This manipulation was not an isolated case. Many other thinkers, such as naturalist Charles Darwin, had their ideas distorted to serve Nazi purposes. In Nietzsche's case, the association with Nazism was facilitated by the actions of his sister, Elisabeth Förster Nietzsche, who played a central role in promoting an adulterated version of the philosopher's ideas. Elisabeth Förster Nietzsche was a central figure in preserving and manipulating her brother's works after his death. Born in 1846, Elisabeth shared a close relationship with Friedrich Nietzsche, although their political views were drastically different. While Nietzsche was known for his criticisms of nationalism and anti-Semitism, Elisabeth became a fervent supporter of these ideologies. After Nietzsche's death in 1900, Elisabeth took complete control of his literary legacy, establishing the Nietzsche Archive. She took on the task of cataloging her brother's writings, but her influence extended beyond mere curation. Elisabeth manipulated and rewrote parts of Nietzsche's works to align his ideas with her own nationalist and anti-Semitic convictions. A notable example of this manipulation is the book The Will to Power. Friedrich Nietzsche had drafts and fragments of ideas that were never fully developed into a definitive work. Seeing an opportunity to promote her beliefs, Elisabeth compiled these fragments and published them as if they were a complete work, titled The Will to Power. To illustrate, it's as if someone took sketches and personal notes from a famous author and published them as a complete manifesto, completely changing the meaning of the original ideas. This work was then used by the Nazis to justify their quest for power and territorial expansion, completely distorting the original intent of Nietzsche's thoughts. Elisabeth also played a significant role in connecting Nietzsche to the Nazi movement. She had close contacts with prominent figures in the regime, including Adolf Hitler, who personally visited her and expressed his admiration. During a ceremony in Weimar, Hitler even presented Elisabeth with a bouquet of flowers, symbolizing a sort of symbolic alliance between the distorted ideas of Nietzsche and Nazism. Elizabeth's influence was not just a matter of textual manipulation. She was also active in promoting a public image of Nietzsche that aligned with Nazi ideals. Elizabeth lived until 1935, and during those years, she worked tirelessly to position Nietzsche as an intellectual precursor to Nazism, something he never was. Friedrich Nietzsche is widely recognized as one of the most influential and at the same time most misunderstood philosophers in history. His ideas, complex and often expressed in metaphors, have led to numerous misinterpretations. One of the most well-known and distorted is the concept of the Übermensch, or Superman, which appears in Thus Spoke Zarathustra. For Nietzsche, the Übermensch represents a philosophical ideal of personal transcendence. He believed that humans could transcend the limitations imposed by traditional morality and social conventions, creating their own values. This idea was a direct rejection of the religious and social dogmas of his time, encouraging a pursuit of self-overcoming and the creation of a new type of human being, free from traditional constraints. However, the Nazis distorted this philosophy to promote the idea of a superior race. They interpreted the Übermensch as a justification for Aryan supremacy, claiming that Germans were destined to be Nietzsche's supermen above all other races. This grotesque distortion turned a philosophy of self-development into an ideology of racial hatred. Another frequently misunderstood idea is Nietzsche's criticism of Christianity, especially in the book The Antichrist. Nietzsche saw Christianity as a morality of slaves, exalting weakness and submission. He believed this religion hindered the full development of human potential. The Nazis used this criticism as a justification to reject Judeo-Christian values and promote their own pagan and anti-Semitic ideologies. However, it is important to note that Nietzsche did not advocate hatred against Jews or any other group. His criticism was philosophical and cultural, not racial. In addition to Nietzsche, other thinkers like Charles Darwin also had their ideas distorted by the Nazis. The Darwinian concept of survival of the fittest was used to justify eugenic and genocidal policies, under the premise that only the strong should survive. Just like in Nietzsche's case, this distorted interpretation was used to justify morally reprehensible actions and policies. It is almost ironic that a man who criticized mass thought and promoted individual development was used to justify a regime that valued uniformity and blind obedience. Nietzsche, who detested collective mediocrity, would certainly have been horrified to see his words used to propagate the idea of a pure race. The manipulations of Friedrich Nietzsche's ideas had profound consequences, not only for the philosopher's reputation, but also for how his works were understood and transmitted over time. The appropriation of his thoughts by the Nazi regime created an indelible association between Nietzsche and Nazism, something that persists in some circles to this day. This led to a widespread misunderstanding of his philosophies, causing many to unfairly consider him an ideological precursor of Nazism. A philosophy professor once told me, Nietzsche was condemned to be interpreted through the filter of his sister and the Nazis. How can someone who never read a book be its greatest prophet? This observation reflects the injustice done to Nietzsche's thought and the need for a critical re-evaluation of his works. Elisabeth Förster Nietzsche's actions were particularly damaging. By manipulating and editing her brother's texts, she not only influenced the interpretation of his ideas, but also compromised the academic integrity of his works. The publication of The Will to Power, for example, as an authoritative text by Nietzsche, contributed to the distorted view that he promoted a philosophy of domination and power. In reality, many of the fragments gathered by Elisabeth were written without the intention of forming a cohesive body of work or an ideological manifesto. The decades following World War II saw significant efforts to correct these distortions. Scholars and philosophers dedicated themselves to separating Nietzsche's genuine thought from the interpolations and manipulations made by his sister and others. This work included the critical analysis of Nietzsche's original manuscripts, letters, and notes to reconstruct the true context of his ideas. These efforts resulted in the publication of critical editions of Nietzsche's works, which sought to remove the distortions and present his ideas as faithfully as possible. While these works have significantly contributed to a proper understanding of Nietzsche's philosophies, the task of fully reversing the damage caused by erroneous interpretations remains an ongoing challenge. The public image of Nietzsche still bears the weight of the associations made during the Nazi period. Beyond academic and philosophical impact, the distortions of Nietzsche's ideas had cultural consequences. The image of Nietzsche as a dangerous philosopher or a thinker linked to extremist ideologies affected the reception of his work in various contexts, including academic teaching, literature, and popular thought. This distorted perception created a barrier for many who could benefit from his critical and innovative thought. Over the years, the work of restoring and reinterpreting Nietzsche's works continues to be a vital task. It teaches us the importance of critical and contextual reading of philosophical works, especially in an era where the manipulation of ideas can have such vast and lasting consequences. Nietzsche's true philosophy, one that challenges convention and promotes self-overcoming, deserves to be understood on its own terms, free from historical and political distortions. The manipulation of Nietzsche's works by his sister, Elisabeth Förster Nietzsche, and the appropriation of these ideas by the Nazi regime are clear examples of how philosophical thought can be distorted to serve specific agendas. This story serves as a powerful reminder of the importance of seeking the truth and understanding the original context of ideas. At his core, Nietzsche was a fierce critic of conventional morality and the social norms of his time. He challenged people to think for themselves, question established beliefs, and pursue self-overcoming. His concept of the Übermensch was a metaphor for the human potential to transcend limitations, not a justification for racial superiority. By recognizing these nuances, we can see that Nietzsche's philosophy is a critique of power systems and a call for individual freedom. So, how can we protect ourselves from distorted interpretations today? What if, instead of passively accepting what is said about thinkers like Nietzsche, we actively engage with their works? We should read their books, explore their ideas, and draw our own conclusions. Philosophy, after all, is a tool for questioning and understanding the world, not a weapon for dividing and conquering. As Nietzsche said, "Become who you are." This is a call to discover and follow our own truth, free from distortions. With this in mind, I encourage you to explore more about the life and works of Nietzsche. I'll leave 2 more videos here on the screen that cover related topics about Nietzsche and his genius. Like the video, comment on what you think about the topic, and remember, knowledge is the path to true freedom. Count on me and follow the White Rabbit.